Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Kerry Wiggum. I'm the postdoctoral research and teaching fellow at the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. Some of you I know have been here before. For some of you, this may be the first time. One of our most important and exciting programs we have is being able to invite practitioners and residents to come to Binghamton to stay here for a week at a time to meet with lots of different classes and to give a public talk. And this week we're especially lucky because we have two practitioners in residence. Today you'll be hearing from one of them, and then also you'll see flyers on your seats for a talk from our second practitioner in residence, Parrot. That will be on Thursday evening. She'll be talking about the connections between education and atrocity prevention, so be sure to be here for that as well if you can. But tonight we're going to be hearing from Marlon Weichart, who is, aside from being a colleague, also a very dear friend, and we're so happy to have him here. Marlon has been a federal prosecutor in Brazil for over 20 years. He has been an indispensable voice advocating for transitional justice in Brazil during that whole period of time. And really, Brazil is going through a very difficult moment, which you'll be hearing about from Marlon, with the election of Bolsonaro. And what I'll say is that the office, Marlon's office of the federal prosecutor is really one of the only and most important voices of dissent and that are protecting human rights in Brazil today. So he's going to be talking a little bit about that. So please join me in welcoming Marlon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Kerry, for these kind words. And I would like to thank as well Nadia and Max for the invitation. Indeed, they are the irresponsible people for this invitation. So if you have to blame someone for what I'm gonna say here, blame them, okay? So I have to confess to you that I'm a bit depressed because I was just reviewing my presentation and I was going through all what I have to expose to you. So I'm a bit depressed. So I have to warn you, if you are with like kind of health issues, so be prepared. This can be a bit tough, okay? Not image, not movies, but just some quotations I'm gonna present to you. I think it was the best way to understand a bit more what's going on in Brazil. But I'm gonna start from, I want to apologize as well for some of you that attended my speech, my lecture on the conference on Saturday. Some part will be overlapping, others not, so be patient, but I apologize if it's boring and repetitive. So I want to start talking very, very quickly about this political situation in Brazil. There are so many things happening that were coming up in the last years that I think that instead of just talking what's going on now, we have to understand the move. It's not the picture that's the more relevant information. The movie, it's when you can really perceive and understand and realize maybe a bit what's going on. I have to warn you as well that Brazil is not for beginners. So it's not my quotation, okay? This is a quotation from Tom Jobim. So he was a musician. He lived here in the U.S. and he was from the Bossa Nova, one the best. But understand that's very complicated. If you think, look, I can't understand what's going on, me too. So one thing that is very important in Brazil nowadays is the investigations and all the case, the criminal accountability for corruption case. This is something that it's going on for the last 5 years, and of course, so I have to give some background. Brazil had a dictatorship for 21 years, from 1964 up to 1985. Then we had we have had a new constitution in 1988, so the transition for democracy. The first democratic government was elected in 1989. It was impeached, the first government, because of corruption scandal as well. Then we had the election of a social democrat, that slowly he moved to the right. So Fernando Henrique Cardoso, many of you may have heard of him. So Fernando Henrique Cardoso. And after Fernando Henrique Cardoso, we had Lula, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, with the Worker Party, so the PT, Partido dos Trabalhadores, so the Workers' Party. And after Lula, he had 2 terms, so 8 years with Lula. He made his successor, that was Dilma Rousseff. Dilma Rousseff had the first term. He was elected for the second term, and then she was impeached. She was impeached not for corruption. She was impeached for some budget. It's called like she made some creative budget, something that every president did in the entire history of Brazil after the dictatorship, but only her was accountable for this, okay? Because it was in the middle of this car wash operation that was investigation corruption during the Lula and the Dilma time. So it was a mix of feelings among the Brazilian population, but it's very interesting to perceive that the cause for his impeachment was not the corruption investigation. So this corruption investigation, it's provoking a lot of reactions. In the beginning, it was accepted by most of the population, 99% of the population, of something that we really needed to go through, because corruption is something structural as well. I mean, in many countries in the world, but slowly look, this operation is coordinated by the Federal Public Prosecution Service, where I work. Just to be clear, that I feel in some way very comfortable, but uncomfortable as well, to express some criticisms regarding some things that happened, because slowly it took some appearances of a moral crusade against some actors in Brazilian politicians. We have to combine this with a phenomenon of outrageous violence in Brazil. In Brazil, every year, 60,000 people are killed violently. So it's something that really affects the population in general. It's something that came during the dictatorship, but it's getting worse in the democratic period. So every year we have a worse rate. So just this year that we could reduce a bit the number of homicides from 63,000 to 62,000. So it's stable, and we are expecting to see the next statistics. During the Fernando Henrique Cardoso government, it was very successful to control the hyperinflation that Brazil had as a legacy from the dictatorship. So it was the main characteristics of the Fernando Henrique Cardoso government was the control of inflation. It was super important. So, but during his government, all the social inequality was rising. So Lula government was focused on the control or the reduction of the social inequality, economic inequality in the country. He had to deal with the 2008-2009 crisis, global crisis, economic crisis. He performed very well during this period. But when it was in 2013, around 2013, the model it was adopted by the PT started to fail, and the international scenario was changing. And since 2014, Brazil has been in economical downturn. We experiencing some decrease in economy. 2 years from now, it's stable, but really huge rates of unemployment. And we had a trend since 2010 of decreasing inequality in the country, but now inequality it's increasing again. So this is combined with this. I'm gonna show some case of these anti-PT and anti-Lula feelings in some way as a combination of these three previous factors. And I want also to emphasize that Brazil had this transition from dictatorship through democracy without having a holistic approach and a policy for transitional justice. The transition in Brazil was based on oblivion and impunity for human rights perpetrators. And in some way, so no criticism and no self acknowledgement by the military of the human rights violations was provoked. And the security forces structures remain the same of the dictatorship age. And it's part of some of the problem that we will talk, including this one here. This is connected with 5 factors that are structural in the Brazilian society that remains almost untouched. That is, we have a Brazilian society historically, it's very unequal. I mean that Brazil is among the 5 or 10 countries in the world that has the higher rate of inequality. It means that almost 50% of the population are poor or extremely poor, and 1% or 2% are in upper class. So with a relatively weak middle class, not so, and a huge poor class, but in some way, the middle class, it's what has the control in some way of the moral values, and they are very influential politically speaking. This is combined with a social structure with very, very low possibilities of changing of classes. So if you are basically, your future is determined by in what social class you have been born. So if you were born as poor, likely you're gonna go to bad schools, you're gonna have bad health services, so the opportunities will be really more difficult. And there is a society as well that Brazil is very famous to being happy, friendly, all this. But at the same time, it's a society that it's tolerant with the difference, special social difference. So this is it's one of the central, I would say, characteristics of the Brazilian society. At the same time, very authoritarian. It's not an option. We have to understand that in 500 years since the colonization, Brazil, 90% of this time was under an authoritarian government, and a model so the authoritarianism is the rule, it's the general rule. The exception was attempts to have a kind of democracy in the country, and of course that all the social relationships, all the institution, governmental or in the society, they are in some way frameworked by this authoritarianism. So this is something that you do not change from one day to another. It demands a process. Just to give an idea, now we are living in the longest period of democracy in Brazil. So it was reestablished in 1985. Now we are 33 years of democracy. It's the longest period in our history in a democracy. That now it's under risk. It's a racist society. Brazil had the longest slavery in the world, with a number of more than 3 million slaves brought from Africa to Brazil, more than to the US, and all these combining with these characteristics of violence. That's in some way a consequence of all these factors. So, what happened recently? as I told you, we were in a good path in some way. So after Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Lula government, the first term of Dilma, it was performing clearly well. In 2013, something happened. And this is something that is still not very clear for the scholars in Brazil. We've been, I'm not a scholar, but sometimes a curious guy, we've been studying this issue because the country was performing well. And suddenly, in São Paulo, had every year, usually it had an increase in the public transportation price. So there were some demonstrations against. Every year there is some demonstration against. Brazil is not like Argentina that every day has a new demonstration. Brazil has every year. So we are more easy in this sense. But then was this demonstration, nothing was happening. So a leftist demonstration and so on. And then the police start to be very harsh with the demonstrators. What? Nothing new as well. But one day, a journalist from Folha de São Paulo was shot when she was covering one of these demonstrations. She was shot in her eye with a bala de borracha.
Rubber bullet?
Yeah.
Rubber?
Rubber bullet?
Bullet, yes, a rubber bullet. And then Folha de São Paulo make a super scandal. Wow, this is super serious, blah, blah, blah. How can the press journalists be shot at, and so on. And the governor reacted badly. And then the following day, there were thousands of people on the street joining this demonstration because of the journalist that was shot at. And something started happening because this following day, the police was very, very hard in the repression, and it motivated for the next week huge demonstrations. So all the country, Rio de Janeiro, here's the Congress. The people invaded the Congress. It was a scandal, invaded the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Something that was completely unexpected in every city in the country. And we saw, what's going on? People was demanding for what? In our opinion, the first moment, they were demanding for more social service. They want more public transportation, better public transportation, health services, education service. But at the same time, it was sparkling some very conservative values against the government. It was mixed, it was not clear. And it's very interesting because some rightists and some conservatives, they could see this as an opportunity, and especially the press. Because in Brazil, the press, it's in the hands of basically 4 families, or 5 families. And they are all conservatives, don't doubt. Even when they are very progressive, for example, now, they look like progressive against Bolsonaro, they are very conservative. There's economic interests, it's what comes first. And they was full of PT for many reasons. But then they start feeling these very conservative and anti-PT feelings. Then came the 2014 elections, and the country was very divided. And part of the responsible for this is for, thank you, may I? It's from the PT, because during the campaign, Dilma was on risk to be re-elected, and the PT made a very, very tough campaign against his opponents, especially against Marina da Silva. I told you Brazil is not for beginners. During the campaign was a third candidate that was not performing super well, but he was a new face on the left, and he suddenly died in a airplane crash. Airplane crashes always happens in Brazil. It's super curious when something important is going on. So he died. And Marina Silva, she's an environment defender, very famous. She was a minister of Lula, but then she fought against Lula, so they had problems. She assumed his position, and she was almost elected because, of course, an airplane crash. Oh, everybody has empathy for the victims and so on. And then the PT was so severe with her that destroyed her campaign. And Dilma had so to deal with Aécio, that was representing the Social Democrats, the Fernando Henrique Cardoso party, and won for a very slightly small difference. So the campaign. Now here you can see where is red, PT won, where is blue, PSDB won. And Aécio didn't accept, this is something very important if you are students of something like social science, political science. This is very important because in this moment, the PSDB broke the golden rule of democracy. One of the golden rules. They didn't accept the outcome of the election. They they asked for an investigation, a silly investigation against the election, but it foiled something that was coming since 2013 and was foiled as well by the car wash operation that was canalizing against PT all the feeling against corruption. Then in 2016, so since after the election, with the PT, the PSDB, the Social Democrats Party, producing this kind of resignation. Does it work? Exist?
What do you mean?
Resignação, this.
Lack of.
No, I would like something more impressive. Okay, they were not accepting the outcomes of the election, and they were creating an atmosphere against the PT, against Dilma. They started organizing huge demonstration against the PT, connecting all the idea of corruption to the PT. Indeed, the investigation was at this time going just only after the PT. So this is Avenida Paulista, the main avenue in São Paulo. We have here likely more than 1 million people in a Sunday. So all the rest, they're very curious because most of them are wearing the shirt of the Brazilian football, the Brazilian soccer team. That is a super corrupt organization. So the federation, the soccer federation, it's the most corrupt organization in Brazil. But they were wearing these shirts, Brazilian nationalism. Nationalism, this is a second thing that we have to discuss better. Yeah. Look, proud to be anti-corrupt, but wearing, I would say, the symbol of corruption at the same time. So, what happened? They created these calls for the impeachment. Dilma was a disaster when it comes to political skills. I mean, negotiation, dialogue with the Congress. She was completely isolated at this time. And then the Congress, the president of the House of Representatives, or the equivalent in Brazil, decided to accept a case of impeachment. Indeed, he was, just 1 week before, he was an ally of Dilma. But as he was also now at this time starting to be investigated for corruption, he asked Dilma and the PT to protect him. And Dilma said, no, I won't. Then he accepted the impeachment. He's arrested today, okay? I think he has already a sentence for like 100 years in prison. Aécio, the other one, it's not arrested because he's from the PSDB. The PSDB, it's a kind of magic. It's a kind of magic. Nobody's arrested. But he's answering for causes that will maybe be a dozen of years in prison. But I think he won't be arrested. And then Bolsonaro, so far, a very isolated member of the parliament. He was like a clown in the parliament because he always saying some bizarre things. I'm gonna quote many of them so you can understand. He made a speech in favor of the impeachment, and this speech was, unfortunately, almost watershed. He said that he dedicated his vote against Dilma to Colonel Carlos Alberto Brilhante Ustra, who was the commander of their barrack where Dilma was tortured during the dictatorships. So this is so strong that another member of the parliament spitted in his face. This is John Willis, that now he is in auto exile. We don't know where. He was re-elected as member of the parliament, but he was so afraid of staying in Brazil that he decided to go to exile. Okay? He will be next week, in 2 weeks, I think, in Brown University for a conference that I will attend as well. So, Bolsonaro at this moment called a lot of attention of the press and so on. So then, going further, comes the election, the times of election. And then Bolsonaro, he could manage very well because with the anti-corruption feelings and the anti-PT feelings, the Social Democrats Party was destroyed as well. All the traditional parties, this is something very dangerous, all the traditional parties, the congressmen, they were in disgrace before the public opinion. So it was time for someone new, an outsider. But he's not an outsider. During 21 years, he was a member of the parliament. So, but he auto-proclaimed himself an outsider, and that he was politically incorrect. He had no commitment with the traditional politic and with the traditional politicians. And he in some way, he canalized all the anti-establishment feelings. Remember, the establishment that provoked violence, the establishment that provoked the downturn, the establishment that was provoking unemployment. And his only proposal was, we have to change everything. But what are we going to change? Everything. How? Everything. That's all, okay? That's it. And he was stabbed during the process, during the campaign. With this, he could not go to any debate. He didn't give any interview. So he was in some way protected by this situation. And he could manage to create a far-right alliance that joined these conservatives in the military and the police force, very committed with this feeling concerning the violence in the country. The evangelical church, he is married to a pastor. But the more fundamentalism branch of the evangelical church, the idea that they have to control the state, they have to teach in schools the creationism, and that almost there, that the earth is flat. Not that far, but I concerned that maybe we're gonna go there. With the neoliberals, economic field, super neoliberals, and connected with this feeling, this anti-establishment feelings, basically stimulated by the idea that he has an anti-corruption attitude. Okay? So this is the scenario. Now, as I told you, I'm gonna bring some quotations of Bolsonaro before he was a candidate, much before, during his life as a member of the parliament. I won't read. I'm gonna give you, because it's so depressing that I can't read it anymore. I read it all today to remember to review my presentation. But for example, now we are talking about torture. So this was in 1999 in an interview. It's on YouTube if you want to watch. I don't recommend. He, at the same time, he was defending torture. He was defending a coup d'etat. He was defending the killing of more than 30,000 people. He was defending that the president, FHC was the president at this time, should be killed as well. And there is another interview that he combines, no, the military should have killed Fernando Henrique Cardoso and some others human rights defenders. Fernando Henrique never was a human rights defender, but he mentioned some human rights defender. Here is he as a member of the parliament. So this cartaz is here, is missing people in Araguaia. Araguaia, it's one north part, in the north part of Brazil, where we had a guerrilla during the dictatorship, and all the guerrilleros, the members of the guerrilla, were disappeared. So around 70 leftists, members of the Communist Party in Brazil. So at this time, 2009, I and some colleagues and institutions, we were looking for the remains in Araguaia. So he put this on the wall of his office in the parliament, saying, missing people in Araguaia. Those that look for bones is a... Then in 2000, he said, I think execution by firing squad is even an honorable thing to certain people. And more recently, oops, what happened here? It was working. Uh-oh. Where I am here? No. No. Just a second. I don't know what happened. Yeah? Yeah. Sometimes it's the version of the PowerPoint, sometimes it provokes some change, and sorry for that. I think the following has a problem as well. Yeah.
I'll just stay here and fix them as we go. Okay. Here. This one.
This one. I have to explain what's a parrot perch. It's part of the technology that the military developed in Brazil. It's a way of torture. So it's just that you put like a perch.
Tell them what arara is.
Arara, it's a loro. It's a parrot. It's a parrot. So it's here. So so you have like it's a perch that you put between two supports. Then you hang a person there by his knees, and you wrap with the hands. So the person stay upside down, naked, and then they use so only this position after 50 minutes can provoke intolerable pain. But it was combined with electric shocks and heating and draw many sophisticated torture techniques. No human rights in this case. There will be pau de arara beating, the same thing for kidnappers. The guy must be broken to open his mouth. The only mistake of the dictatorship was, he said this many times, was torturing and not killing. That the military should have killed at least more 30,000. So I have to to go faster. There is no doubt I would launch a coup on the same day. He was asking, if you were elected president, this is 1999, what would you do? I would launch a coup on the same day. Congress doesn't work, and I'm sure that at least 90% of the population would applaud. No, so no commitment to democracy. I'm in favor of the military regime. I sympathize with Fujimori. Fujimorization is the way out for Brazil. This is 1993. Pinochet should have killed more people. Hugo Chavez is a hope to Latin America. And I would like if that philosophy came to Brazil. I think he's unique. He'll do what the militaries did in Brazil in 1964 with much more strength. It's funny. I just hope the opposition doesn't go into guerrilla warfare like they did here. Now, concerning LGBTs. I will not fight against it or not discriminate, but if I see two men kissing on the street, I'll beat them up. If one son begins acting kind of gay, then when he's spanked, he will change his behavior. I would be incapable of loving a gay son. I wouldn't be a hypocrite. I prefer that he die in an accident than show up with some guy with a mustache. It's a mess. The next step, this in the same day that the Supreme Federal Court approved the same-sex marriage. It's a mess. The next steps are the adoption of children and the legalization of pedophilia. I'm a victim of prejudice against heterosexuals. He gave an interview for Stephen Fry. I don't know if you know who Stephen Fry is. It's a British journalist, British journalist. And he's a super nice guy. So he answered to him. This is on YouTube. If you look for it, you're going to find it. Your culture is different to ours. We are not ready for all this in Brazil because no father would ever take pride in having a gay son. Pride, happiness, celebrating if his son turns out gay, no way. You have to have some sort of moral compass bearing in your life. They want to reach our children in order to turn the children into gay adults to satisfy the sexuality in the future. To not like is not the same as to hate. You wouldn't like the Taliban, do you? We Brazilian people don't like homosexuals. We don't persecute and hunt homosexuals. We even have a great pride march, and we are thinking of having an heterosexual pride also. You'll not be invited. Now, the idea of racism. I wouldn't enter an airplane flown by a quota pilot. Quota is an affirmative action, okay? The government, Dilma's government adopted a system of the quota so that half of the places in the public university, in the federal system, are dedicated to Black, poor people, and indigenous peoples as well, and people with discapacities. So I wouldn't enter an airplane flown by a quota pilot or accept to be operated by a quota doctor, physician. I was at a Quilombo. Quilombo is our former slaves' lands that the Constitution guaranteed the property to them. So the slightest Afro-descendant weighed 230 pounds. They don't do anything. I don't think they even serve for procreation anymore. This was a speech he gave in the Israeli club in São Paulo. And he was applauded for minutes there. He said the same here, in the same occasion. There will not be a centimeter demarcated for indigenous or Quilombo reservation. Then in another interview, since we are a Christian country, God above all, this history of a secular state doesn't exist. The state is Christian, and the minority that's against it can live. He has a kind of obsession of this idea of who is against me should live. Let's make a country for majority. The minority must bow to the majority. Law must exist to defend the majority. The minority suits itself to the law or just disappears. Here, gender. he was having a discussion with another member of the parliament. He was defending some guy that was accused of rape. And he said, and she was calling his attention, you cannot, you're a member of the parliament, you cannot say this. And he answered, I will never rape you because you don't deserve it. The Maria do Rosário, she was a former Minister of Human Rights during the Dilma's government. And she sued him in the civil courts. She won. But in the Supreme Court, the criminal case, the prosecutor general charged him for this speech. But the Supreme Court understood that he was in the parliament and that he was protected by immunity. I have 5 children. There were 4 men. On the 5th, I got weak, and a woman came out. He said, a fraquejada. Preta is a singer, Preta Gil, and she's black, of course. I'm not going to discuss promiscuity with anyone. I don't run that risk because my children are well educated, and they don't live in a promiscuous environment such as is, unfortunately, yours. I wouldn't hire women with the same salary. But there are many women who are competent. During the campaign, if I'm a president, I will leave UN. That institution is of no use. It's an organization of communists, of people that don't have any commitment, at least to South America. With us in office, there will be no such human rights politicking. These bandits will die because we will not send resources from the government to them. Instead of peace, these NGOs do a disservice to Brazil. The State of Children and Adolescents is a law approved in the 90s, must be ripped and thrown into latrine. It's a stimulus to child vagabondage and rascality. Now, on environment protection. We will merge the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment so that no international NGO will continue to do activism with the Ministry of Environment. We are going to shoot all the PT supporters in Acre. Again, the idea of separating the country of the leftists and non-leftists. We are going to put an end to all the activism in Brazil. So, there is a famous speech 1 week before the election. And then he comes up with this very important word. Cleansing. Leftists have to leave, or they leave the country, or they will go to jail. And this was a demonstration like this. This red marginal will be banned from our homeland. This homeland belongs to us, and not to those that have that red flag and their brains washed. Petralhada, people that likes PT, oh, you are going to the end of the beach. This is a military expression. That means border, the barracks, the military borders, most of the time they are in a beach in Brazil. It's very common. And in one of the sides. So bring someone to the end of the beach, it's a summary execution of this person. You will not have more chance in our homeland. I'm going to cut all your privilege. You will not have more NGO to satiate your hunger for mortadella. Mortadella is a depreciative way to refer to left supporters. Concerning labor rights, he said, this after the election, oral rights are an unemployment or less rights in unemployment. So workers must decide, what do you need, what do you want? Work, jobs, or rights? You can't have both, or jobs or rights. And he used the US as a good example. Brazil is a country with rights in excess, but lacks of jobs. Look at the United States, they have almost no rights. The idea is to deepen the labor reform. So, again, and we, in some way, I want to make this connection from all this language, this discourse, these speeches, with some cases of violence. Marielle Franco, She was a city councilor in Rio de Janeiro. She was assassinated in March 2018, before the campaign, but already in all this situation. She was a black woman from a favela and lesbian, and she was murdered, and now the investigations are revealing that she was murdered by the militia in Rio de Janeiro. And guess what? Members of the militia, or the wife of one of the members of the militia, and the daughter of one of the members of the militia, they worked in the Bolsonaro's son office, in the legislative, in the state level. Moa do Katendê, he was a leadership among the black movement in Bahia, very respected. In the first round, he had a discussion in a bar, an argument in a bar, with Bolsonaro's fan. He was shot. No, he was stabbed 12 times. In São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, both governors, they are stimulating police violence. And not by coincidence, just yesterday, the army shot a family. She was in a car 80 times and killed a musician. 80 times. Just because they are going and they found out they looks like suspects, something. The family with a baby was going to a party. So I would go talk about the measures the government adopted in the first 100 days that in some way confirms all this speech. But I think we don't have time. Maybe it would be better we dedicate this to debate. But just to shed some light, the first measure was to approve a provisional measure, legal provision, that allows government to control NGOs. Remember, all he said about activism, he withdrew from the UN Global Compact for Migration. He said that he will not withdraw from the UN of the Human Rights Council, that because he made a mix when he said that he would withdraw from the UN. It's because it was just after the US withdraw from the Human Rights Council. And I'm gonna do the same because he's fan of Trump, okay? But then he was in some way instructed, look, different things and blah, blah, blah. And then he decided he has been threatened to withdraw from the Paris Compact, but so far he gave up. And the Convention for the Protection of Indigenous People in the ILO. He shut down the land reform. One episode, the Minister of Education determined that violence against women, the promotion of quilombolas and peasant culture should be purged from school textbooks. After he said as well that everything about the dictatorship should be purged from the textbook as well, because it was not a dictatorship, not even a coup d'etat, it was just a movement. They sent to the parliament a draft law allowing and some way legalizing this conduct of the army that shoot 80 people, that shoot 80 times against a civilian, authorizing that summarily execute any suspect in order to prevent an aggression. That they are hindering the work of the national mechanism, the national committee to prevent and combat torture. There is no cooperation with NGOs. They eased the possibilities to purchase weapons. Now every citizen can buy up to 4 guns in Brazil. They try to expand the secrecy on information and public information documents. It is repeated, sorry. They decided to eliminate 30,000 work positions in the higher education system. in the public. They decided not to replace any civil servant that retire. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is threatening to withdraw from the ILO's Indigenous and Tribal People Convention, as I said. They decided that they can't have any social participation in many public policies. This is what is a tradition that has been built in Brazil since the end of dictatorship, the direct representation in social programs, in the design of public policies. They announced that the Brazilian embassy in Israel would move to Tel Aviv. Later, they postponed this decision. Now they are shifting the mental health policy that was something from the movement from in the 90s. Now they are stimulating the hospitalization of patients in asylums, so the incarceration of patients. They ordered the military force to celebrate the 1964 coup d'etat as something to be celebrated and the dictatorship. So, to finish, we are now ending the first 100 days of government, in some way kind of misgovernment. We have these 4 groups inside the government, the core of the government, but they are fighting a lot between each other. So the military, in some way, the military officers are the more stable and more serious group. So they are doing the best work, I have to confess. We have the evangelical church with a very fundamentalist approach to control minds and hearts. The Olavetes, this is, so you can search on Google, who is Olavo de Carvalho? I recommend you to be prepared. He's the far-right guru of Bolsonaro. He lives in the US. Okay, he auto-proclaimed himself as a philosopher. He's an astrologist. But he has a huge influence in the Brazilian government, in Bolsonaro. He's very close to Steve Bannon. And of course, the money owners. Yeah. So indeed, sometimes I think that these 2 groups are there just to create confusion and to distract ourselves from really what's more interesting for the capitalism, for the bad capitalism. He doesn't respect the traditional Congress, the idea of the traditional politics. So intensive use of social media, I don't know who inspired him to try to govern through Twitter. So he tweets every day, 3 times every day. And he hired and fired his ministers through Twitter. And he has been trying to undermine the political party, but he has a problem. He needs to govern with the Congress. So supposedly, I don't know what he thinks. His popularity is falling down very, very, very quickly. Now it's only 34%. It was 49% in January. It's the lowest for all the presidents that has been elected in the first term. So that's it. I forgot that I would finish here. So I thought that was another slide. So it's a miss. So I would like just to call your attention to finish that this idea of early warnings. Indeed, I have to confess, I told today in the class, I thought that would be worse. Can you believe? I thought that would be worse in terms of this idea of cleansing, this idea of sending clear messages of persecution against opposition. But he, so far, is constrained in this part. He's not following his speeches because it was a kind of obsession for him, you can see. For me, it's clear that he's not there to govern for the majority or for everybody. He's focusing on this small group that's around small. I would say like 20% of the population that shares his ideas, very conservative, in some way fascist ideas. But during the electoral period, he was very, very smart in joining these anti-something feelings. What is a very common characteristic of these far-right movements. When it comes to the electoral period, they try to put together people of different mainstreams and to, look, we have an enemy in common. Let's focus on this. Forget all the rest. So he could do this with this anti-establishment feelings in Brazil. And there are some scholars that has been pointing out that this is a characteristic that happened here in some way, but in Hungary, in Poland, so that the same idea, and they work with this conviction that the electoral system doesn't represent anymore the majorities, because most of the people, or a large sum of the people, won't vote. And many will vote in blank, leave the vote open, or will nullify its vote. So they try to reach like 40%. It's a good number, because 20% is this group that doesn't discuss the ideas, doesn't think. And all the others he can put together with this idea of having an enemy that must be defeated. Okay, this is what I would like to bring as some reflections to you. Thank you for your patience. Feel free to make comments, to ask questions, please. I would love to participate in such a discussion. Here, there. Okay, from the left to the right, okay?
I have a question about Lula right now.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been under house arrest.
No, he's arrested in prison.
In prison. And he's had no access to it, like there's no interviews of him since he's been in prison, right? Like what are they called?
Yeah, no, I got it. I was our producer here asked me to repeat a bit the question because it's being recorded. So you're asking if Lula is under house arrest and if he can or not give public interviews, if he can be interviewed by the press. So he's arrested, he's in prison, and he was forbidden of giving interviews. So he tried to, but the Supreme Court said he couldn't. Okay.
Is that commonplace if a politician is arrested?
It's uncommon. It's something that's basically started now with this car wash operation. So we have Lula arrested. We have some others politicians arrested as well, but not the same state to the same rank as Lula. There is no other president arrested. What is very uncommon as well, it's how speedy the judiciary was to judge Lula. It was completely uncommon, so fast. May I give a
But you may also want to tell them that when his brother died, he was not allowed to attend the funeral.
No, this is another issue. Mm-hmm. So there is a provision in law that says that every any person in prison can attend the funeral of mother, father, parents, son, daughters, and brothers. And his brother died, so, I think in December, I think, and he asked to go to the funeral. The justice said no. And now, 1 month ago, his grandson died. And then he asked again, he requested to leave at this time, because the first time it was so absurd. This time the justice left, but under strict recommendation that he could not make any public speech, that he couldn't make any public demonstration of connection with the people. At certain point, for me it's a human rights violation. He was applauded when he was leaving the funeral. What was terrible, because he was attending the funeral with like a dozen of policemen with heavy guns to his grandson. And people was calling him, Lula, 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 and then he was raising his hand to say, and the policeman came and put his arm down.
So having your office specifically deal with some of the prosecutions from the post-dictatorship in the 1960s, and having this return to authoritarianism with Bolsonaro, how do you think your law office is more receptive to some of these early warning signs under his regime, and like what actions do you take to make some progress to stop the violations?
So we try to call the attention for what's going on in Brazil. So we do not have the political legitimacy to do something concrete. So we can try to sue him if he commits human rights violation. For example, so when he sent a draft of law like this, we call it Slaughter Law Act, we make a public statement saying, look, this is unconstitutional. When he published this executive order expanding the secrecy on information and public files. So we asked the prosecutor general to start a constitutional action before the Supreme Court to declaring unconstitutional the executive order, and we made a public statement that the Congress used it to withdraw this executive order. So it's a kind of advocacy, and when it's possible, we go to the courts, so to judiciary. For example, this determination that the military, the army, should celebrate the anniversary of the coup. So we made a public statement, and our offices, our regional offices, send recommendations to the commanders of the barracks in the region to say, oh, look, you may be personally responsible if you celebrate the coup, and so on. So we use different strategies, and we are in straight connection with many international institutions as well. So in being here in some way, it's bringing awareness of what's going on in Brazil. So expanding the denouncing in some way what's going on. You have, no, okay. There were one more questions from here. So, you. Okay. I remember that I saw, I think, 3 hands. So here, then we go back.
I mean, I know we keep talking about Lula and PT, but I think that background is kind of important.
Okay.
It's like getting everyone's attention. So you said all those protests for Rousseau's impeachment after 2014 election was actually kind of against the basic rule of democracy. So I'm taking that like that was like kind of not lawful thing to do because she already won the election. And you also identified like 4 families maybe manipulated the political arena at the time to kind of feel against like anti-PT sentiment in people. Do you think like if there is any international politics that feel the similar sentiment in people too, because like as far as I remember, a lot of PT supporters at the time, I don't know if they're still holding the same view, but they believed Operation Car Wash and then this entire impeachment thing was mostly supported by United States. I mean, even the NSA's involvement in Operation Car Wash was like a big thing, and then people suggested Sergio Moro had some links or ties to the United States, and they have maybe a different political agenda behind that, and they're trying to, you know, like push that political agenda that was pretty much like very well received or maybe even sponsored by the United States. So now, like, we're talking about Bolsonaro, and you're saying that, you know, like, you're talking about that to figure out some ways for us to maybe denounce him and his actions. But on the other hand, I am now questioning how much, I mean, personally, yes, of course, we can denounce, or institutionally, we can denounce him, but how much at the state level, we as the United States are against him or kind of actually pave the way for his involvement in politics, or at least becoming so big, whereas he was almost like clown-like figure previously. So I have that kind of question. What do you think about this entire like international politics and United States involvement in that, like from 2000 maybe 13 to, you know, like
Okay.
so on?
Let's try to approach some issues. Of course, there is a lot of conspiratory theories around the car wash operation, the role that Sergio Moro has played, and that there is a joke, for example. This is a joke, okay? It was in the newspaper. Sergio Moro came with Bolsonaro 2 weeks ago to visit the U.S., official visiting the U.S. And they were invited to visit the CIA headquarters. Something completely uncommon that a head of state would visit the CIA. What was the joke? That when Sergio Moro entered the CIA headquarters, his WhatsApp was already connected. So the Wi-Fi was already connected. This was a joke. It was in the newspapers in Brazil. Many messages with this. So giving, just to give the idea, look, Sergio Moro, it's one arm of the US. But on the other hand, we have to consider that what was the first, or the main company under investigation was the Brazilian public oil company, Petrobras. And Petrobras has developed technology, a very, very sophisticated technology to extract oil from very, very, very deep sea shores. Pre-sal, I don't know how to say pre-sal in English. So pre-sal, it's previous to the salt layer of the ocean. So Brazil find out that there are oil, very high quality oil, but you have to go like, I think 10,000 meters underneath the surface of the ocean to find it. So it's a very sophisticated technology. And that US, of course, the American oil companies would be very interested in weakening the Petrobras, because they would create the opportunities to the American companies explore such oil. And in this case, it's said that the Koch brothers, they were behind these civil movements that organized these huge demonstrations against Dilma. Indeed, two new organizations from the air came up and could organize with money that's not transparent from where it came, organize demonstrations with 1 million people in São Paulo, in Avenida Paulista. So there's a lot of discussion. It's not proved. So, but it's one hypothesis, especially that the PT says, look, the idea behind all this is to destroy Petrobras. So I'm not convinced of this argument. I never think that we explain such happenings just with one cause. So there are always several and multiple factors around this. So this was the first question. I don't remember the second part of your question.
Well, I think I tried to connect this to, like Bolsonaro, because like we talked about, like really, I'm gonna call weird, obviously not weird, but things that he said. And like we even identify him as like maybe like an authoritarian guy, or at least Brazilian like pathway towards authoritarianism or something like that. Although you said that his approval rate is declining, so maybe it's not. But like
Yeah,
time will
I think.
show. So I was trying to ask, what do you think about the position of the United States with the previous PD government and then now Bolsonaro government?
Yeah. So the U.S. administration now, it's very strongly connected with Bolsonaro, but not basically because of a decision of the American administration, but it was a decision of the Brazilian president. So that he says that I'm a fan of Trump. I'm a fan I love the U.S. So and he loves Disneyland as well. So I wouldn't say that it was a shift in the American approach to Latin America and to Brazil. Indeed, it was much more Brazil that came after asking for, look, we want to have more attention. And in my opinion, Brazil is doing very bad business with the U.S. at this time. For example, Brazil is withdrawing from the condition of a country in development in the OMC in English, the Commerce Organização Mundial do Comércio. World Trade Organization that allows Brazil to have a lot of benefits, to receive the support of the U.S. to go to the OCDE, the Organization of Developed Countries. So it's a bad deal for Brazil. All the analysts, or almost all the analysts, they say it's a bad deal because what Brazil will gain with the support of the U.S. Will lose much more accepting to be recognized now as a developed country in the World Trade Organization. So, but I wouldn't say, we can't say that during the petit times, it was a bad relationship between Brazil and the American administration. It was different. Brazil was looking for some recognition as a leadership, at least in the global South. And Brazil was trying to strengthen the connections between South countries, but not a way that would say, look, we are against the U.S. In some moments, but it was always in a good relationship. So I wouldn't go so far. I think that's a lot of, as well, of initiatives of provoking some fake news in this sense as well. So I think you would like to ask.
Thank you, Marlon, for the presentation. I'm lucky that I'm here to hear you once again, because at the conference it was heavily loaded head with all those presentations from different speakers. I have two questions basically. You talked about the corruption, the car wash operation. So is it being carried out by the government itself or any other independent anti-corruption commission or something like that? And my second question is, looks like that Bolsonaro is a very active user of the social media. Is there any restriction for the public content in the social media from the government side, or it's just open for everyone?
Well, the first question, no, the car wash operation is conducted by the Public Prosecution Service. That's autonomous before the government, before the parliament. So it's we call a task force that coordinated by the Public Prosecution Service with the support of the federal police and of course the support of the equivalent to the IRS as well. So, but coordinated by the Public Prosecution Service. And the social media, it's something, in this way, something new. So we don't have many regulations concerned. We have our ethical code that in some way regulates how members of the government should behave, but nothing specific to social media. So in some way, it's a new room, and so it's not clear. Basically, Bolsonaro has been criticized a lot by the press and by scholars and by politicians on the way that he's using the social media. But he doesn't seem to be worried about it. Okay.
In his first 100 days, Bolsonaro has already done quite a bit of damage within Brazil, and given his derogatory remarks towards minorities, specifically homosexuals, women, minorities, what do you believe he will do in his next 100 days that could potentially violate more human rights?
So, if I bet, I would bet for $100 million what's going to happen in the next 100 days. It's impossible to know because we are just, it's so unstable what's going on. It's really weird to say what's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe when we finished here, this session, something new happened. For example, just to give an example, today he fired the Minister of Education. It was one of the Olavetes. Okay, this Minister of Education, I won't give details, but it was something bizarre. He was from Colombia. He was not Brazilian, and he could not even speak Portuguese fluently. And he was the Minister of Education. And everybody was expecting, look, he learned. He will nominate a person that, okay, will be a rightist, but something that will put things to happen. So, Minister of Education. So he nominated another. I was just checking the press, so it's something very superficial. Olavet. So, and the military was trying to control the Minister of Education to take at least a serious approach for education policies, educational policies. So, and people was looking for information about this new minister, and they found a speech that he gave recently, after the election, saying that the main problem of the education in Brazil, the educational system in Brazil, is the Marxism the cultural Marxism. And he finished his presentation in a conference xingando, insulting communists, and say, look, if you go to a conference or a meeting and you have an argument with a communist, insult him. It was his recommendation. So I can't say what's going to happen in the next 10 days. 100 days, it's a luxury. She first.
Thank you. Two questions also. I am wondering what, obviously there's, all of this hate speech that he's been producing for quite some time. What are some activist organizations now, what are they doing to combat this hatred vis-a-vis some very public murders that have targeted specific leaders that have been working in popular movements? And then the second one, I was struck by how in some of his comments he's talked about how he adores Fujimori and Pinochet, and then Chavez kind of stuck out there, right? Because I would think Lula's and Chavez were still just much more on friendly terms, and I'm wondering if he has distanced himself from Chavismo and from specifically Chavez's successor from Maduro, and how that fits into his rhetoric now.
Yeah, he doesn't answer this question. Okay, if he asked about it, he escapes because he can't recognize. So during the campaign, he was always saying, "Look, the PT is gonna transform Brazil in Venezuela," and this is something that was the middle class, the conservatives, and the Social Democrats was saying the same thing. So before Bolsonaro was a candidate, during the last 5 years, every day the newspapers in Brazil was blaming PT for the corruption and for the economic crisis. Every day. And many people said, look, they are creating a monster. Because they were betting that the Social Democrats would win the election. But then, just 1 year or 6 months before the election, started to coming up the corruption scandal concerning the Social Democrats. And then, wow, it was the opportunity Bolsonaro or any other rightist. Two others outsiders started to they were like rehearsing to be candidates, but they withdraw in the end. One was a TV show star that now I think he's almost a communist because he has been saying the obviously saying, look, the main problem in Brazil is inequality. We never will have a development with solving, at least basically solving the inequality issue. And it's a very conservative guy that can't think, because Bolsonaro doesn't talk about inequality. It's something he doesn't approach in any situation. So this is the first question, the second question. So he was all the time, he could be the scapegoat for the PT. So, and he could manage to be this guy. Concerning the activism, the NGOs, they are super active. So everybody feels, and I remember in December we had many meetings. Everybody was fearing, what's gonna happen? Should we ask for exile now? We're gonna be arrested in January. One Brazilianist in France said that in 2 months the PT would be closed by the government. So this was a lot of threatening in the air, but indeed everybody kept working, and it's working. For example, the Human Rights Watch decided to launch in Brazil its annual report, and did it. So it was something very relevant because it called the attention of the entire world. Every year when the Human Rights Watch launches its reports, it calls the attention of the international press, and they did in Brazil with a lot of public speeches, so it was very important. All the Brazilian NGOs, they are very active. Many of the grantors, they are supporting new initiatives in Brazil. So they understand, the international community, I think it's aware that what's going on. So, and you can see, for example, now that we have this kind of Ministry of Truth in 1984 George Orwell style, for example, Bolsonaro and the Minister of Foreign Affairs declared that the Nazism was a leftist movement. It happens already last year. Some people said this, and the German embassy made a public statement in Portuguese explaining what was Nazism. So, and now Bolsonaro went to Israel and made a speech. No, the Nazism was a leftist movement because it has social in its name. It was the social party, blah, blah, blah. His party has social in its name. It's the Social Liberal Party. So, but he didn't realize that could make the same connection. So it's something.
Just listen to somebody else wants to.
So far,
what do you think are the real tangible risks of Brazil returning to?
Sorry.
What are the real tangible risks that you think Brazil could return to an autocracy or even engage in a genocide? And what do you think should be the international community's response to that?
So it's hard to evaluate, to make a risk assessment. We have some warnings. I think that I mentioned that the press in Brazil for the last 5 years was feeling these anti-PT feelings, but now it looks like that they understand, they are understanding what's going on. So they've been watching every movement of the government. So indeed, I would say that the quality of journalism in Brazil is increasing again. It's something good. Even the most conservative of these families that runs the Estado de São Paulo newspaper, they supported the Bolsonaro's campaign last year. But now almost every week they give the editorial opinion. It's saying, look, it's crazy, cannot go on like this. But I'm very worried that we could have any attempt to impeach him or put too much pressure on him, and then he would resign, because the vice president, it's a general, it's a former general. And so what would this mean in terms of militarizing more and more the government? Indeed, we have 100 military members in the government already. 5 ministers are military members. So it's already strong, but and the vice president, he was also a fan of Ustra, the head of the Center for Torture in São Paulo, where Dilma was tortured as well. So it's not a better forecast if such kind of change. So I'm really concerned that look, we have maybe keep going. And the better solution would be that in the next election, we could overcome such situation. I don't believe in opportunistic options. So something like this. I really think and I hope that we keep going and we will try to control the institution slowly, try to control. The opposition will find a way to organize themselves, the opposition parties, and to create democratic union, something like this, to bury any move of the government that the government would last the full term. It's what I would like.
I have a question about a possible disaster scenario. I've heard many of the presenters in your panel at the conference talking about how the military elements of the government are the serious one, the military is the balanced one, the military is making statements. Way back in the 90s, where military coups were a lot more researched, one of the very traditional scenarios for having a coup is that you install an incompetent government, democratically elected, and then the military comes in and saves the day. And hearing you all speak sometimes gives me the creeps, because it sounds like the military, like the nice populist military officer could come in and say, the left have failed in terms of corruption, the right has failed because they are going to kill everyone, let's save the country by getting rid of democracy with a nice tight military dictatorship. What do you think about the chance of that?
So that's the same. I was saying that all the script seems to be conducting to this happy end for the military. So, but we cannot forget that, for example, what I fear that the military, Bolsonaro is a former military member. He was a captain. He's surrounded now by 4 ministers that are general. Something's wrong. because a general, it's a bit hard to a general to accept orders from a captain. A captain that was invited to leave the army after he was organizing an attempt, a terrorist attack, supposedly, against the army. This is part of the history. I said it's not for beginners, okay? So, my concern is that what kind of pressure may be done on Bolsonaro and how he will react. I think that he thinks he has the support of the population. But that's why I said he only has now 34% of support. So, and he was playing with the Congress in this way. Look, I talk directly to the people. I don't need the parties. I don't need the press, because I talk directly. It's more democratic. It's a kind of social agora. He doesn't know what agora is, okay? But we are like in a more scholar language trying to explain to him. So this is a huge risk in Brazil, and the military they are really prepared to this speech because they are already using it. It's very clever because I said that there are 4 generals, and the vice president is a general as well. These 4 ministers, they don't talk to the press, but the vice president, he can't be fired, okay? Every day, he gives a speech. He was here in Harvard for this huge Brazilian conference, and he gave a speech, always super moderated. He's a super moderate speech. You know, okay, blah, blah, blah. So it's the perfect central-right Democrat. He's playing this role, creating room, in my opinion, for this solution that I hope won't happen, because it wouldn't be good for democracy as a whole. I think that the Brazilian people has to deal with the consequence of this election and understand and go deeper in these happenings. I mean, was it?
Yeah.
You want to be the last one, because I'm not respecting the order because you said no, all the others before.
I have another chance, but let's have her last.
Mine, it's in some ways in keeping with the last 2 questions, but it was rather than emphasizing, say, the military and that kind of risk, because I don't know much about Brazil at all. And
now you're curious. You're gonna spend the whole night studying Brazil.
But what are the institutions that are in place to resist, and how effective are they? So the press doesn't sound, or it sounds like it's better. Does Congress have much power, and do the courts have the legitimacy to push back?
Well, we need a longer conference because there are so many aspects involved in such question. So, many of the conservative people and liberals people that were in some way accepting Bolsonaro's election as the shorter way to get rid of the PT said no, because the institutions are strong enough to deal with Bolsonaro's authoritarianism and Bolsonaro willing to violate human rights. So he will be controlled by the institutions, and he will be able to implement all the neoliberals approach for economy. That's what the rich people want. I think that people is too much confidence in the institutions. Why? Not because people are evil in these institutions, but remember that I mentioned, we don't have a tradition of democracy. It's a country that has a young democracy. After 500 years, we have an authoritarian culture. Our institutions, they are very authoritarian. So when it comes to decide if they want democracy or in some way stability, or the first thing they give up is democracy. The Brazilian elite has no commitment to democracy. This is my opinion. After being studying this, I took a sabbatical year for a while to study a bit more this. I'm convinced that they would sacrifice democracy in favor of any of the elite privilege. Democracy in Brazil is convenient. When democracy is convenient to the elite interest, wow, we love democracy. But when democracy is not coincidence or it's not working well to keep the privilege, we have to change, maybe wait a little bit more, maybe having Bolsonaro. The election of Bolsonaro is part of this process. So, because he was out of the democratic game. Clearly, he doesn't share democratic values with the Brazilian society. He doesn't. But the Brazilian elite decided to go with him against the democratic PT, because they don't like PT. But they know that PT is democratic. But then they created this fantasy. PT is Hugo Chavez. Brazil will be transformed into Venezuela if the PT win again. So this is what the mantra that was proclaimed all the time, sometimes subtly by the press.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to say anything. I'm Brazilian.
Então, em português, né? A gente pode...
Eles não entendem nada.
Então, aí você pode perguntar coisas mais difíceis.
I'll ask the very difficult things because nobody will understand me. But thanks very much. And like you, I don't understand what is going on. I don't think I can. But what I was wondering is if you could talk a little bit about the sentiment against PT. Because when we were talking about what institutions could resist, what kind of resistance can come to Bolsonaro's power from the institutions, it occurred to me PT is not an institution, but it is a force. But one of the things that I really don't understand, or can't say I really understand about, can you hear me? About Bolsonaro's election is the force of the feelings against PT.
Yeah, I think there is a mix of reasons for these anti-PT feelings. Some of them are connected with what I was just saying now, this idea of the privilege of the Brazilian elite. I'm going to give two examples. I could think in others. During the Lula government, Lula had a very conservative approach in the economic policy. Okay, nothing new, nothing transformative. The Brazilian bankers never made as much money as they made during the Lula government. Brazilian industrials had all the fiscal privilege and benefits that they could ask for the government. Okay, they never were so profitable as they were during the Lula government. But Lula developed a set of compensatory policies to the most poorest people of the population. One of these is the Bolsa Família, the idea of an income to the poorest people, the most poorest people. It was transformative in the north of Brazil, in some way develop an economy, a small economy, but it's the small store that sells food, that sells hardware, and so on. And what, in my opinion, was the most important policy of the PT, he increased the minimum wage consistently during the 10 first years of PT government, 8 years of Lula, the first 2 years of Dilma. They increased the minimum wage. And likely 50% of the Brazilian population receives wage. Of course, that was a cost involved this because the pensions are paid also based on the minimum wage. So that was a fiscal budget problem likely that would be solved because the economy filling up would, in consequence, of course, generates more taxes. And this transformed a lot of public spaces. For example, airports. The airports were crowded with ordinary people. It was so uncomfortable, Nadia. It was shocking. I had to share my airport with ordinary people. There was lanes to go through security. I used to go in 2 minutes through security. It was taking 50 minutes. It was horrible because people were sitting at my side. They don't know how to behave on an airplane. It was terrible, so uncomfortable. And so the airplane tickets was getting more expensive because there was a huge demand. People could, look, I took one day a cab in Rio de Janeiro. It was so interesting. And the cab driver talked to me, wow, now there are these cruisers coming to Brazil. I'm organizing with my family to go in a cruise, a 2-night cruise. The cab driver. Because I realized that I can pay in 12 installments. And it's cheaper than go to Cabo Frio, a city close. I'm organizing with my friends, all my communities of cab drivers. We are going with our families, blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine sharing a cruiser with cab drivers and their families? Second, this was creating a feeling of we are losing our privilege. We have to share the public spaces. It's terrible. It's really terrible. We are still living the legacy of slavery. Remember this. We never discussed the legacy of slavery in Brazil because it was created this feeling, no, it was solved. With the abolitionists, it was solved. There is not a problem. There is no racism in Brazil. It's a pity that all the black people are poor, but it's a social problem. It's not a racism. It's just a coincidence. The second, maybe worse. During Dilma government, she approved a constitutional amendment guarantee labor rights for maids. This woman that works in her house, that she sleeps there. She gives you the breakfast, the lunch, the dinner. She takes care of your baby. She cleans the house. Yeah, can you imagine it? The cost rises like 30% from one day to another because now they want to have vacation. They want to have extra hours. Imagine it. How she can only work 8 hours, but the breakfast is 6 a.m. and the dinner is 8 p.m. It's impossible. It's terrible. I'm going to have to fire. I'm going to have to hire two. How will we manage? People don't assume these feelings, but you can see this idea. The PT is threatening my privilege as high class, upper class, or high middle class. This is very interiorized, I think, in the mind and the hearts of these super middle class with the soccer team. I'm nationalist, I'm Brazil. My flag will never be red. My flag is yellow and green. And it was this confront after 2013 with the demonstrations against Dilma. And at this time, before the demonstrations against Dilma, the 2014 election, we have to recognize the PT fueled this idea of confront. He said, who is against PT? It's against solving the poverty problem in Brazil. This was the mantra that PT defended in 2014. I don't know if you remember this. Then in 2016, it was the opposite. Who is PT? It's in favor of corruption. That was the mantra. And during this demonstration, the idea that should injure PT sympathizers was really strong. In many cities, we had fights provoked by these conservative people against sympathizers of PT. I'm going to give you one example. My daughter, she went for a demonstration against the impeachment. She was walking after the demonstration in an upper middle class neighborhood in São Paulo, and from a window, they threw out a watermelon over her group. They could skip, but could kill them. And something, PT! So that's the level of violence that was to. And Bolsonaro he perceived this, and he used this with his hate speech. So I think it explains a bit. So it's a combination of many factors. Finally, you. Clara, want to ask a question?
No, I mean, there is something about like...
I don't know what time we have to finish. They're going to charge us extra hour for the light.
20 minutes ago.
Yeah. No, there's something about this social structure thing which it has striken me about Brazilian society, this concept of middle class, which actually for like US and European levels, it's actually rich people. But I think that these are really a minority. The thing is, I think their lifestyle is the one that marks the standard kind of style life of those middle class, which are not really that middle class, that aim to have that house, like cleaning lady that stays all time. These are, I think, and the ones that thought that they could travel and now they see these people in the airport. I think, and these are many more people, and these are the people that were going to demonstrations. I think that there's also something that needs to be explained in this group, that it's not just this rich elite, that actually it's the ones that are really profiting.
Yeah, of course. I think that one, because this phenomena doesn't explain, and you're right, why the worker class voted for Bolsonaro. Because Bolsonaro had a consistent votation in remember this map, red and blue. Now the blue is Bolsonaro, and it conquests the west part of the country as well. The northeast is still PT, where all these social programs were more effective. But it doesn't explain why the workers voted for Bolsonaro in the southeast, in the south, and in the Middle West. Why? I think that the violence issue is very important. This idea of the violence, 60,000 people killed, and the economical crisis as well, it was the other part of this explanation. So they think, look, we have to go to something different. And Bolsonaro was the option available, and he decided to go. And again, this demagogic approach of harshful to be harsh against bandits, it works. It always worked. It has been the mantra for the conservative, the rightists, everywhere for age, and it worked. And even, it's very interesting because we have a lot of researchers with some of these communities, and this feeling, look, I'm a worker, and my neighbor, his son is involved with drug dealers, so I work so hard, and he's this vagabond, so the police should be really hard with them. But the following day, the police will kill everybody, as I show you in this example of yesterday. But this feeling is there, so so it's not fair that I have to work hard and he doesn't, and so on. So it's part. There are multiple causes that could explain, but must be better researched. I think all this phenomena, because of course I'm speculating. I'm giving some hypotheses to this. It's too early to understand this as deep as it should.
All right, he gets to ask over dinner.
Okay.
Please join me in thanking Marlon.
Thank you.
Wasn't necessarily an uplifting and happy topic, but an important one for us to consider. Thank you all for coming.
And don't feel depressed.